G'day friends and fans, and welcome to Dave Talks Stuff Ukraine update for the 29th of October 2025. The month's almost over. Another troop rotation coming in about 2 weeks. And the Russian offensive is ramping up. The siege of Pokrovsk is continuing. No, it's not the only one. However, the most interesting part is the media is starting to shift focus. But before I continue, I'm your host, the author, David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood of Cade, Power Games, Into the Elsbound, The Erotic Tales from the Empire, Part 1, out now, Part 2 coming soon. And I'd like to thank the patrons and other supporters who help make this channel possible and invite you to support me through all the links in my link tree. Now, I love it when people ask a question. Yesterday on Breech, I was asked, hey, how come Putin just doesn't kill Zelensky? I don't exactly remember what I said precisely. I'm not going to look it up. But here's the thing, key takeaway, I've said this many times. First and foremost, Zelensky is incompetent in the eyes of Putin. You can believe all you want, doesn't change what Putin thinks. This is what I don't understand. Because you have opinions doesn't mean everybody else shares them. And it doesn't mean because your friends think your opinions are great, everybody else does. See, most people have the public opinion and the private opinion. The public opinion, 90% of people out there say what they think you want to hear. The majority, the polls, say about 60 to 70% do not support the Ukraine war in any form. Only some moderately support Ukraine. Most, however, when it comes to a Russian victory, it's more about, well, they don't want Russia to take all of Ukraine and they prefer a settlement. But when you're not given enough options, and this is the thing in war, there are many options. So, why doesn't Putin just kill Zelensky? Well, first and foremost, it won't end the war. It'll only anger Ukraine and make them fight on. So it'll make them less likely to make a deal. And, of course, I think I also said, again, I think the first one was that Zelensky is seen as Putin by an incompetent. And Zelensky's handling of the war has actually been beneficial to Russia. Now, this could be a number of factors, including they have psychoanalyzed Zelensky and know how to read him. Or they bugged his office, one or the other. You never know. But here's the third part I don't think I included. I think I thought of this later. It's a dangerous precedent. America's killed foreign leaders. Not many. Look at Gaddafi. I think all in history, killing foreign leaders hasn't proved very effective at all. Regime change has done nothing to kill ideas. Look at 75 years of Chinese communism. Well, they say 100 years, but, close to 75 years of Chinese communism. The Chinese Communist Party is just effeminate, right? It's feminism. It's arrogant. It thinks it needs no outside man. Yet at the same time, it's completely dependent on a man. In this case, the United States. And, of course, it never accepts responsibility. And, of course, it always bleats how great it is and that it's just trying to make the world a better place. So, whatever you think of Putin, you have to realize the war is driven by his motives, not yours. His beliefs, not yours. Same with Zelensky. His beliefs, not yours. His motives, not yours. So I'm sorry if you don't like it when I don't like your opinion, but your opinion doesn't affect the outcome of the war. And I'm just trying to bring you the actual facts, because there's a lot of propaganda. Now, for a moment now, you probably noticed there's a image on the screen. Now, this is one of the rare times the media has published something from the Russian perspective. This is what a 153mm does to a house. You look at most of the city. That's Pokrovsk, by the way. Yeah, well, sorry. This is a small town on the outside of Pokrovsk. Ukrainian positions systematically being annihilated. I warned you this would happen. I've said this for years now. And sooner or later, Russia will stop caring what you think and will just line up the artillery and do what's called a walk. Okay? A walk is when you, and I believe this was started with the United States, it's when you fire at a position and then you walk it forward. Keep incrementing the artillery in a line. Now, they're not doing this, but what they're doing is systematically firing precision rounds at entrenched Ukrainian positions, knowing the high explosive round will annihilate that position. It's when they're no longer seeking surrender, folks. This is grinding Ukraine literally to dust. In part, this is driven by Israel grinding Gaza. This is in part driven by when America ground Hamburg into the ground, when the Nazis ground Stalingrad into the ground. Sometimes it works. Systematic destruction can, and the Romans used it. It was effective for centuries. Then when it was used against them, they didn't know what to do. They were overrun and overwhelmed by the combined. See, Rome was so used to fighting one army, and they were used to fighting disorganized armies. Romania, I believe, is the first real defeat that Rome had tasted in a long time. Germany was not their first insurrection, but it was their last. And eventually it became not just the Romans, not just the Huns, but the Goths, the Visigoths, the Vandals. But what they didn't mention is that all the other people who joined in, all the people who parted to allow the invaders to pass through, the Swiss in particular, providing horses, mountain passage. When war gets to a certain point, and everybody can see it, the last people sitting there, right? And this is in Rome, in ancient Greece, the Mongols. They all just sat there, mumbling about their former glories. True, most of the Roman senators did flee through scout routes in Sicily to North Africa, and they lived there for a few centuries in hiding before they returned to Europe as the Messidae. But they had former brethren in Europe to return to. Now, in this, Russia is just driving back Ukraine completely. It's just not. They're not just forcing the evacuation of civilians. They're making sure they can't come back. They're making sure the Ukrainian army cannot occupy these positions. They're prepared, however, the strange part is the Russians are prepared to rebuild. We've seen this in several towns now. We've seen the rebuilding of Donetsk and other areas. There's no reason yet to question this as any different. But the media is shifting their reporting in fighting. The number of attacks, the number of positions, how many positions. They're not specifically saying they attack civilians, although they do mention the fact that the Ukrainians are now admit there's only 561 residents remaining in Kupiansk. Thousands of people were evacuated as the Russian forces advanced. Even mentioning that Ukraine has attacked and killed civilians. They're actually starting to be less pro-Ukrainian and more where they should be, and that is the neutral news. The news should not have a side in a war. Even if you're the American news, you shouldn't be the voice of American propaganda. You should be the voice of reason, the voice of truth, the voice of fact, so the people know exactly what they're supporting. See, here's the thing that most people understand. War propaganda isn't aimed at the enemy. The enemy isn't listening. War propaganda is always aimed at its own civilian base to manufacture consent for their war crimes. And trust me, World War II, the Allies racked them up like they were girls in a bar. And they were sailors on shore leave. And trust me, when I say war crimes, I'm talking about everything from war propaganda, kidnap, murders, assassinations, targeting of civilians, time and time again. And you may think victory at any cost is justified because the other guys are the bad guys. What made them the bad guys? You seem to forget that. War profiteering, number one, especially the black marketeers. There are I kid you not, there are entire banks in Europe that made bank simply by taking people's money, hiding it, and then after the war, hoping that very few survivors. Yeah. There's the worst of humanity in every war. But there's also sometimes the best. Now, we've had a repeat, so it's not a propaganda but Mr. Zelensky has called for peace talks with Russia, but then again ruined it by immediately saying it would not cede more territory. So it won't cede more territory. But here's the thing. This is still viable. He may have ruined it because Russia said they don't want any preconditions. But I think Russia should accept that if Ukraine freezes the battlefield and won't cede more territory in future talks, that might be a good thing. And they are working on a ceasefire plan. That's a good thing. German economy, of course, is ruined, and they're working out a deal for written assurances about German businesses to be exempt from the sanctions because the assets are no longer under Russian control. There has to be legal, right? There has to be some legal things going on there, compensation, etc. It has turned out that Many Indian refiners have paused new orders, but they're insignificant. The biggest one, including Indian State, has not stopped. The Indian State ramped up orders yesterday. And they've also ramped up aircraft. Now this is again devolving that you still have the war profiteers trying to flood in weapons. As I said previously, when a war comes to an end, you'll always see the ramping up of violence, the ramping up of weapons. So we'll look at the state of the battlefield, and we see most of the same targets hit. Ukraine has fired drones, and they hit the oil depot near Simferopol. They've also attacked a railway near Tomak. What they'll never tell you is how many Ukrainians die doing these worthless gestures, which always retaliated. Russia always retaliates and hits them harder with Odessa, Kherson, and other areas of Ukraine, including Kiev, getting hit again. Ukraine attacking a civilian town in Bryansk again. Now, the only fighting in the north, still no progress. Fighting has taken a pause in Kupiansk. This could be due to the civilian evacuation, with the Russians pushing from the east while they consolidate positions from the north. It also could be chilly weather, in that they are expecting a cold front to be moving through. But in the warmer south, the Russians have taken a little bit more land near Lyman. As you can see, they are slowly creeping forward. Now they're creeping up on Seversk and taking more territory, though they haven't entered Seversk. They've taken a little bit more territory along north of Kryvyi Yar. There's fighting on the outskirts of Kryvyi Yar, on the outskirts of the forest, in Kryvyi Yar, outside Kryvyi Yar. The Russians have taken more territory up to here at Pokrovsk. Their assault forces have taken the main road. They are now backpedaling and pushing the Ukrainians out of the area south of this road. Still have made some, but not big progress here. And again, I would suggest most of this hasn't advanced, although there's been some changes in the battlefield because of the long-range rocket artillery, particularly in Fortress Crimea here, which would be a key target for Russia, which so far they've done very little damage to. I think they were hoping that the Ukrainians would withdraw completely, as they try to flank it to create the cauldron. Of course, in order to weaken this front line, they have to weaken its defensive position, where reinforcements would pour through this area here by bringing up artillery, so that they can pretty much launch a 35 to 70 mile radius of rocket artillery. These are heavy rockets, not light. They're not the 122s. These are 133, I think, or 32. They are bigger rockets. They're basically firing a Volkswagen at these towns. Each one could blow a building completely up. Though most of the time, they are only using drones. They're not expending a lot of ammunition. We know this, right? And we know that Russia's advanced in the north here, taking a little bit more territory here. But where they really got the Ukrainians panicking is the troops caught here. They cannot retreat without coming under fire, and they are completely within range of light, medium, and heavy artillery. The Russians have increased their hold here on Krasny Lyman and along here on the rail line, this rail junction. They've taken way more territory. Most of Novo has fallen. The Ukrainians retreating into Myriad. Most of the countryside is now under Russian control, except for a few spots here and here. These open fields, probably mined, while they remain open. The Russians have seized a lot of control here and wiped out a lot of Ukrainian positions. Fortress Pokrovsk has been breached. The center of this is no longer just under fire control. Russian troops have crossed the street and taken up positions in buildings. And it was after I finished recording yesterday. 200 troops had breached the wall. What they call the outer wall. What they called here the Ukrainian. The Ukrainians had mined this area, trying to force the Russian tanks up this road so they could, fire, be guided by spotters up here and here and snipers control the streets. These bigger buildings here serving as fortress towers. Street clearing right now is going on. We don't know exactly, but it is under fire, right? All of this is under fire. How intense? Images are not available reliably. They will only show the firing of Ukrainian artillery, which appears to be firing over the town from positions up here, which means Ukrainian armor cannot get into the town. There's two reasons. One, you're at risk of being hit by your own artillery. And two, they're probably at risk of being hit by Russian long-range rocketry if they get too close. Now, a lot of long-range Russian rocketry hasn't been used. Okay? Now and again, they'll load up a vehicle, fire off a couple of volleys, and then that'll be it. It's about efficiency. They could systematically destroy the entire town and just send in troops to clean up. They did that eventually in Bakhmut. But so far, they are going light. But they have breached Pokrovsk, taken a lot more territory, and have the Ukrainians in some areas trapped in these big buildings that were once like their shelter from artillery. Like these buildings are not they're not like our, little walls. These are 30 centimetre thick concrete bunkers masquerading as civilian housing. Don't forget, Ukraine, all the way through Ukraine, was built as a buffer zone for Russia expecting a European invasion. A lot of people don't know this, and that's understandable. Cold War propaganda had everybody believing Russia was the enemy, where in fact the reality of the Cold War is Western powers were trying to manufacture consent for a war against Russia. And they're doing it again. Here we have more advanced Russia appearing to stabilize its front line by taking more territory, by heading south. They look like they are still headed towards Turn, and that will be the north of the siege point for these towns here, which may in turn, they've taken hardly anything here. This is long suffered, but held resiliently. The Ukrainians have been able to hold Orsk simply because the Russians have a self-imposed limit on manpower, which means they can only spare manpower from their most of the manpower is going into the three main battle groups. 1, 2, 3. Because they're taking linemen from the north, right? Taking crops from the south and taking this from the south as well at the same time. Now, the second Zelensky line was meant to crack within 6 months. It has taken over a year to crack. But as you can see, now and again, they will take a huge chunk, push up close, getting closer. As Ukraine's rockets are getting less and less effective, push back further, their losses are mounting, their equipment losses are faster than they can replace. Now, there was a report, I forget which station it was, said that Russia's using 1956 tanks in Pokrovsk. You know what? I would not admit to being defeated by 1956 Russian tanks, okay? Now, yes, the hulls were made between 1956 and 1972, when in 1972 the T-56 was replaced by the T-72, which was mainly a turret upgrade. Now, since then, every T-56 has only about, out of 10,000 tanks, something like 200 a year would be upgraded. And that's what they're doing, right? They're taking T-56s, ripping out the turret, ripping out the old, wire controls, putting in T-72, T-72M, which is, I think, designed in 86, as a stopgap between the T-72 and the T-80, though the T-80, I think there's about 1,200 of them. T-90 is outnumbering them right now. So there's a lot of T-72s, which are a lot of them are modified T-56, a few thousand T-80s, because the main battle tank, by the time they got to full production of the T-80, they were already... the 80s were almost over. The T-90 was soaring ahead in tests, though a lot of T-80s were also stopped because were also exported. So, same with the T-56. They say Russia has 10,000. No, they had 5,000. They exported around 5,600 of those. They exported thousands of T-80s. So they did keep some, right? And it kept around 10,000 tanks, 10,692 or something like that. But as of 2022, but don't forget, right? They produced far more than that. Most of them sold to Russia and China. China did a lot of rebuilding as well. So did India. The Indian tank, particularly the Brahman tank, is a rebuilt T-90. The T-110 is a rebuilt T-80, believe it or not. It's just got a fancier turret, but it's still a T-80 hull. Some of them are T-90s, and I forget which. It's about the... I think the T-90's got the 3 in the front, whereas the T-80's got the driver up front and the gunner, it's still you have the gunner sitting in the gunner chair to aim in the turret, but he's sitting above the loader. But the loader is automatic, but it still has a commander who also doubles as ensuring that the shell gets expelled properly. So yeah, it's a 3-man crew. So various designs, T-80, T-90, and as you see, the battlefield is intensifying. New battles are opening up. The Russians are fighting through the night. Again, they're taking advantage while they can of the fact they still have a lot of night equipment. And believe it or not, they've probably captured a lot of night equipment. But as you can see, the map update, they've taken more of... They're fighting in Ruddy now. Taking the lead down here to clear out probably a lot of this is just Cylinders. No, it's not Cylinders. Solyandria firing rockets into these fields to clear them. Right, high explosives on a cord. Not a new idea, by the way. The Americans used this, I think, to clear Omaha Beach. But the Russians have added a liquefied fuel rocket to the end of that long det cord. So it has basically a gift of napalm at one end and a big det cord, fuel-soaked det cord on the other to basically light everything up, But that's where the battlefield is at. But politics is where the war is going to be won. And Zelensky's chief of staff apparently has disrupted diplomatic efforts to end the conflict, pushing a hardline negotiating stance, which is counterproductive, which may actually expose Andrew Day as Zelensky's handler, not chief of staff. That Andrew Day is serving foreign interests and not Ukrainian interests, and that Andrew Day wrote that Andrei Yermak is pushing a hard line, and that Andrei is the handler. Sorry, Andrew Day. You're not the handler. Andrei Yermak is probably working for either Soros or the Ukrainian Secret Intelligence Service, who basically is the Azov Battalion at this point. His influence over Zelensky is long-running and long-standing. He is the man who wrote the scripts for Zelensky that helped him not only get into the TV show The Servant of the People, but to get into office. His profound influence, Day wrote, from time to time, directs his frustrations not only against Zelensky. So Trump should not just direct his frustrations at Zelensky, but Yermak. Yermak could be the one, okay? Zelensky, as I said, if Zelensky turns out to be the peacemaker after all, I'll apologize. And that Yermak is the one, just like it turned out Hitler wasn't the fanatic, it was the SS chief. And Goebbels, the propaganda chief. Those two, in 1944, took over the party, turned Hitler into a puppet, had basically the SS guard him at all times, making sure that he followed his daily speeches, which were dictated to him over the phone, which he would then have to try and memorize and dictate to his secretary to make it sound like they were coming from him. There's a whole chapter, I think, in one of the books dedicated to propaganda about how the Nazis deceived the world into thinking that Hitler was the Chancellor of the Reich with absolute power, when in fact behind the scenes the party was bitterly divided by factions, dominated by factional infighting. But because main characters never died, nobody noticed, but there were purges of the party from time to time. Operation Valkyrie exposed that to the West, and had they chosen wisely, and von Stauffen and others had listened to their British counterparts and worked with the Americans, well, could have been over. 44 could have gone ahead as planned. But they made one huge mistake. They used the phone system, which was extensively spied on. Okay? The Nazis had a virtually unlimited budget of fanatics who were listening at every phone call for the chiefs of staff. And they do this all around the world, you know. Control the flow of information. You don't have free speech. You cannot freely organise. They plot against you. As soon as they detect any I'm not talking about Trump or I'm talking about, you know, authoritarians here. I'm talking about genuine authoritarians like Venezuela, Cuba, China, Russia. They all, right, even Russia, right, for all its attempts at democracy, still try to control the flow of information and still try to counter, use state organs to counter opposition. And this is what the Democrats do with the mainstream media in the West. This is what Ukraine does with the SBU. They still haven't given up their authoritarian habits. It's the same with Russia. They still haven't given up all their authoritarian habits. Russia and... See... Now, this is very carefully written, and you have to realise that he's saying, right? Andrew Day is saying, right, that it is not saying that America shouldn't vent frustrations at Putin, but he's saying that, and I've said this too, that he needs to direct it not just against Zelensky, but Yamrak. That there are now exposed factions in Ukraine who don't want the war to end. And if Zelensky wants to have a credible career after the Ukraine war, he's going to have to side with Trump and oust these factions legally and morally. You can't just say, hey, SBU, arrest yourself and off yourself. No, there has to be a legal dismissal, a legal protection against backlashes, and anybody attempting any violent backlash getting their true just desserts then. But Ukraine has to give up its former authoritarian habits, particularly spying on people to make sure that anti-dissent is cracked down on. But up to 6 million Ukrainians, they're admitting, finally. Though this is actually just the number who left in the last 2 years. Yeah, because in reality, only 25 to 28 million remain in the territories controlled by Kiev. Soviet Union, there were 52 million. It's fallen. The number of returnees may seem significant, but the birth rate of Ukraine, 1.53. That's its peak since the fall of the Soviet Union. Ukraine's dying. Okay? And one of the reasons why it's dying, I forget the name of the TV show, but it's about the sex trade. It features the sex trade in Thailand, Ukraine, Brazil, Argentina, and a few other countries, including Mexico. And they're basically saying the sex trade is killing countries, turning women, particularly girls, into wholesale commodities. basically systemic abuse on a industrial scale to turn out thousands of prostitutes. So, this isn't voluntary. They've destroyed entire industries to keep these countries broke. Right? Look at China. China's the largest sex trade in the world. And they use it for influence peddling. So does Ukraine. So does Russia. So does Brazil. Ukraine lacks firepower. Even with Western help. Italy's Guido Crosso has said he doesn't think Ukraine can reconquer. Recover should have been the word of it. But and that Moscow will never relinquish those territories. Lost in 2014, 2022. After, it's time to negotiate. Well, I think a lot of people have said that. But, see, Russia stressed that lasting peace depends on renouncing NATO membership, demilitarization, denazification, and recognising new territories as the new territorial status quo. So, I think Russia eventually has to accept, maybe Ukraine won't be in NATO, but I think Ukraine eventually will be in Europe, simply for Europe to save face. Whoops. Interesting. Italian firms have now, an interesting study, across Europe, firms have been looking at how much they've lost to the Russian sanctions. I no idea. 140 million Italy has lost in revenue because they can't sell toilets to Russia. And that's money they'll never get back, and future business will never return because they now buy ceramic toilets from India. Europe has forever destroyed half its economy. Its advantage. And Putin pointed this out 2 days ago, that Europe will become a dependent vassal by 2030 of the United States if it continues to shed industry. That, yes, he acknowledged that Russia and China has had issues and that China has shed industries to India, but Europe is also losing industry. These industries aren't returning to the West. Only about half are, and they're not choosing Europe. They're choosing Mexico, well, some chose Canada, but predominantly India and Vietnam. But Kupiansk, Russia's poised for a new offensive, according to Sputnik. His troops are encircled, and Zelensky won't issue the order to lay down arms. Their fate is sealed, according to Russian commentators, who are former soldiers. They'll either be taken captive or dead. Right now, these apparently are not just... these aren't small. Apparently, these are key control points. If you know anything about war and maps, they do refer to, like, when Germans lost Paris, they lost France, right? Because you need a communications hub, you need logistics, and you need a powerful fortress position, a show of strength, to basically dominate the rest of the battlefield. And if you don't have this safe zone for your army has to retreat, set up a new command center, a new forward operating base, a new helicopter, new communications hub, etc. Well, Ukraine was designed as a series of fortresses to fall in succession, but each time it falls, it would take a bulk of the invading army with it. See, Kamensky and all these would, and to some extent Kupiansk, were all built for the Russians to come in behind and start defending the Russian border against an invader. They were never meant to be used as a staging point for the Ukrainian army against Russia. But when Zelensky came to power, they already were being transformed, okay? Zelensky inherited this war in some part set up by Obama back in 2014. But Zelensky came in on the promise of peace. But now that he's been spinning the story that he's in full control and making gains and liberating territory, as I pointed out before, one of his favourites, you can look it up, the story was on Kiev Independent. That all 66 square miles of Dropania have been liberated. And this was Zelensky's own words, right? The Russians were fighting here and still fighting here. They've never made it to Dropania. But that's not the only one. Zelensky claimed to have liberated Pokrovsk. Shortly later, 200 Russians broke through the Ukrainian lines down the street and held this intersection, and the army has since then pulled through and started taking blocks. They annihilated all this within hours. They were fighting here for a few days. They were fighting up here. Assault forces have made it in before. Right? But there's Ukrainians trapped here. They can't cross the street without coming under fire. They can't leave these buildings. There's street fighting everywhere, all through, apparently. Right? You've seen the photos. Russia's systematically firing into here, destroying building by building. Ukrainians won't surrender, boom, building blows up. Completely, walls and all, just poof, powdered. And now they're turning their guns towards this area. They are, however, right now, street fighting. As you can see, 100,000 troops have amassed. And you can see them here. They are on the outskirts here. They are in the city. This is the back to the map. These areas, they're here in this area right now. CNN report. They've crossed this street. All right, these buildings. Look. See, that's those buildings right there. In this yellow zone, right? Russian troops in that park on the other side of the street. This is a key Ukrainian stronghold in Pokrovsk. As you can see, it's burnt out, blowing out windows. Okay, they've completely taken it apart, pulled the wings off the flies. The last thing you want to do is turn around to the world and say, oh, but they used T-56s. So you got defeated by tanks older than your president. That's not a good sign. When you have modern M777s and many other modern weapons, and you got beaten by Russian T-56s, are you sure the Ukrainian Kiev is not actually the Moscow Independent? Did you get the Moscow story from the Moscow Times? Because it reads more like Russian propaganda right now, the fall of Pokrovsk. Although, it's a bit overbearing. Oh, what's this? Oh, yeah. This is a Ukrainian variant of a Russian tank killer. Now, they're big guns. But as we're seeing, the T-90 has been able to stand up. Okay. Yeah, but as we've been reporting through the day, here they are in Ukrainians are to be, they're not hundreds. There's about 10,000. Or, so there could be hundreds left. Some of them probably did make it out of Pokrovsk, but there's street fighting. Those Ukrainians trapped in these buildings. They leave, unless they surrender, they get shot at. They don't leave, they get shot at. They're going to be hunted out. There's the rocket forces. This is Ukrainian rocket forces preparing to fire. I think these are the Polish missile launchers. They're pretty much copies of the Russian 122s, but they're on a heavier tracked vehicle to give. Actually, it looks like a variant of the Striker, probably developed for Europe to replace the the tracked BTR, because in the mud the lightweight BTR is ain't doing so good. Doesn't have the horsepower to pull out of some of the mud in Ukraine. But there you go. Different battles throughout the day. Different people have been showing videos of artillery drills and that. Wonder where they get them from. But there you go. That's the Russian 152. It's a big machine, right? It's actually bigger than an Abrams, right? It's a huge barrel. Right? It's almost the length of the entire tank. It's got a huge range. I believe unofficially it's like 35 miles. Now, it can be fitted with laser guided ordnance, but something like only 1 in 10 are what they call guided munitions, and they only use them sparingly when they absolutely need to hit a bunker. Otherwise, they just rely on the fact that artillery barrages are, 10 shells cost less than, one guided artillery piece. And also the time it takes to make guided ammunition and all sorts of other logistical problems. But Ukraine is in a pickle, and I hope, really pray to God that people stop supporting war and start supporting peace, because there's no winners in war. Most of these men in these pictures won't make it home. That's a sad fact of war, which hopefully will hit home to you and realize that just because it ain't you dying doesn't make it right that they're dying. Because for every Russian dead, there's 1.7 Ukrainians dead. Probably more. And Ukraine as a country is dying. Because its women long ago abandoned morality for money. For convenience. Just like every other Western country. Half of China. Half of India. Most of the world is in a bad state right now. The last thing we need is war. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. And please support the channel. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, which you can find in the description below, in my profile. Scan the QR code on the screen. Please and thank you. Really appreciate each and every one of you, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye for now.